Title: The Snowbound Secret. Jenna and Marcus had been married for 3 years, but the cracks were starting to show. They thought a romantic Christmas getaway might reignite the spark, when Marcus stumbled upon an ad for an exclusive lovers retreat in Aspen, Colorado. Jenna was thrilled. A week in a luxurious cabin surrounded by fresh snow, roaring fires, and gourmet meals sounded like the perfect escape. The retreat promised intimacy and connection, hosting only 6 couples at a time. For a more personal experience, it seemed ideal. The two packed their bags and flew out of Houston, eager to leave behind the stresses of daily life. Arrival. The drive to the cabin was breathtaking. Snow blanketed the trees, and the mountains stood majestic against the wintry sky. As their rental SUV crept up the winding road, Jenna marveled at the quaint sign that read, "Evermore Lodge, where love is eternal." The lodge was a sprawling, rustic, beauty wooden beams, stone fireplaces, and a wraparound porch adorned with twinkling Christmas lights. As they pulled into the driveway, 5 other couples greeted them warmly. Everyone seemed friendly, a mix of ages and backgrounds. Jenna felt an instant bond with Karen, a vivacious woman in her early 40s, with a loud laugh and piercing green eyes. Dinner that night was extravagant. Candles flickered over a feast of roast duck, truffle mashed potatoes, and endless glasses of red wine. The retreat's hosts, a couple named Samuel and Vivian, exuded charm. Samuel's deep voice and Vivian's radiant smile made everyone feel at home. They toasted to renewal and rediscovery, and promised an unforgettable week. The first omen. It began subtly. Jenna noticed how the other couples seemed too close. They whispered in each other's ears, giggled at inside jokes, and cast sidelong glances at her and Marcus. At first, she chalked it up to jealousy. Maybe their relationship wasn't as idyllic as the others. The next morning, during a group hike, Marcus slipped on a patch of ice, spraining his ankle. While Jenna fussed over him, Karen laughed. "You know, accidents happen in these mountains all the time." Her tone was light, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. The unease grows. That night, Jenna woke to the sound of footsteps outside their room. Peeking through the door, she saw Karen and 2 other guests, Jake and Melissa, whispering in the hallway. When Karen caught Jenna's gaze, she didn't flinch. Instead, she winked and placed a finger to her lips. The next day, Jenna tried to voice her concerns to Marcus, but he waved it off. "You're overthinking. Everyone here is just eccentric." Jenna's unease deepened as strange occurrences piled up. At breakfast, she noticed a jagged scratch running down the side of Marcus's face. He claimed it was from brushing against a branch during the hike, but Jenna distinctly remembered him wearing a hat and scarf the entire time. Later, when she passed the library, she swore she heard soft crying. But when she opened the door, the room was empty except for a faint, lingering scent of perfume. Symbols started appearing everywhere, carved into wooden beams, etched faintly into the frost-covered windows, and even drawn into the snow outside their door. They resembled intertwining circles with jagged edges, like a ritualistic design. Jenna caught glimpses of Samuel and Vivian tracing the symbols onto the backs of the other couples during dinner, their movements subtle but deliberate. During an evening in the lodge's sauna, Jenna found a small, bloodied cloth tucked beneath the wooden bench. She gasped, showing it to Marcus. But by the time he turned to look, it was gone. "You're just stressed," he insisted, though even he seemed less certain. Once, while walking through the snowy grounds, Jenna saw a group of the couples gathered in a clearing, their faces illuminated by lantern light. They stood in a tight circle, murmuring in unison. Jenna strained to hear, and caught fragments of a strange chant. "Through the binding of love, we transcend. Through the sacrifice, we endure." She backed away, her heart pounding, and nearly stumbled into Karen, who was holding a curved knife. "Looking for something?" Karen asked, her voice deceptively sweet. Jenna stammered an excuse, and hurried back to the lodge, her skin crawling. The ritual. On Christmas Eve, Samuel announced a special tradition. All the couples were to gather in the main hall at midnight for a candlelit ceremony. It's about connecting on a deeper level, he explained, his smile too wide. Jenna was uneasy, but didn't want to seem paranoid. She and Marcus arrived in the hall to find the other couples already seated in a circle, each holding a candle. The room was eerily silent, except for the crackle of the fireplace. Samuel began to chant, his deep voice resonating. Vivian passed around a chalice of what she claimed was mulled wine. When Jenna took a sip, it tasted metallic, like blood. She spat it out, drawing stares from everyone. "You must drink," Vivian said softly. "It's tradition." Marcus, visibly uncomfortable, whispered, "Let's just go along with it." Jenna noticed that the symbols carved around the room seemed to pulse faintly in the candlelight, as though alive. The other couples swayed in unison to Samuel's chant, their eyes closed, their lips forming silent prayers. Jenna clutched Marcus's hand, her palms sweating. The escape plan. That night, Jenna insisted they leave. "Something is wrong here," she said, her voice trembling. "These people aren't normal." Marcus finally relented. They packed quietly, but as they opened their door, they found Jake standing there, blocking their way. "Going somewhere?" he asked, grinning. Jenna screamed. The sound brought the others running. Within moments, they were surrounded by all 10 guests, their faces blank, their eyes cold. Karen held up a butcher knife, and Samuel stepped forward. "You can't leave," he said. "The ceremony isn't complete." The hunt. Jenna and Marcus bolted, shoving past the group and running into the snowy woods. The wind howled, and the cold bit into their skin. Behind them, they heard laughter, not frantic or angry, but amused, as though the others were playing a game. They stumbled through the forest, Marcus limping from his sprained ankle. Jenna whispered prayers under her breath. The sounds of chanting grew louder, echoing through the trees. Jenna tripped over something buried in the snow and screamed when she realized it was a half-buried skeleton, its fingers still curled as if clawing at the earth. The couples pursued them relentlessly, their movements unnervingly fast and coordinated. At one point, Marcus cried out as something sharp slashed across his back. Jenna turned to see Vivian holding a sickle, its blade glinting with his blood. The final act. The chase led them to the edge of a frozen lake, the moonlight reflecting off the glistening ice. The cult members encircled them, their knives and sickles gleaming. Samuel stepped forward, his ceremonial dagger catching the light. "Your love will sustain us," he intoned, his voice reverberating with an eerie authority. "Through your sacrifice, we will endure." Jenna clutched Marcus, her nails digging into his arm as they backed toward the center of the lake. "You don't have to do this," she screamed, her breath forming frantic clouds in the freezing air. Samuel smiled, a calm menace emanating from his face. "Love demands sacrifice. Jenna, your bond will make us eternal." The cult began to chant again, their voices low and guttural, blending with the howling wind. The symbols etched into their weapons seemed to glow faintly, casting ghostly shadows across the ice. Marcus grabbed Jenna's hand and whispered, "Run. When I say go, run as fast as you can." Before Jenna could respond, Marcus lunged at Samuel, tackling him to the ground. The ice cracked ominously beneath their weight. Jenna froze as chaos erupted. The cult surged forward, their movements jerky and inhuman. Karen lunged at her with the curved knife, but Jenna sidestepped, grabbing a jagged shard of ice from the ground. She drove it into Karen's shoulder, eliciting an unearthly scream. Marcus wrestled with Samuel, the dagger between them glinting as they struggled. With a sickening crack, the ice beneath them gave way, plunging both men into the freezing water. Samuel's scream was cut short as the icy depths swallowed him. Marcus's head bobbed to the surface, his hand outstretched toward Jenna. "Marcus," Jenna cried, dropping to her knees. She reached for him, but the cult was closing in. Vivian grabbed Jenna's hair, yanking her back. "You're not going anywhere," Vivian hissed, summoning every ounce of strength. Jenna twisted free and slammed her elbow into Vivian's face. She turned back to Marcus, but the water was still. The cult surrounded her, their chanting rising to a deafening crescendo. Desperate, Jenna hurled herself onto the ice, pounding at it with her fists, screaming his name. The ice beneath her cracked again, sending jagged fractures outward. Suddenly, the chanting stopped. Jenna looked up to see the cult members frozen in place, their eyes wide with terror. A dark shape loomed beneath the ice, spreading like ink in water. The shadows twisted, reaching up toward the surface. One by one, the cult members were dragged into the lake by unseen forces, their screams echoing in the still night. Jenna scrambled backward, her breath hitching as she watched the icy water claim them all. Christmas morning. Jenna woke to the sound of soft bells ringing in the distance. She was back in her bed at the lodge, the sunlight filtering through the frost-covered windows. Marcus was gone, but his side of the bed was perfectly made, as if he'd never been there. She sat up, her heart racing, and looked around the room. Everything was pristine, untouched by the horrors of the night before. She stumbled out of bed and opened the door. The lodge was eerily quiet, the hallways empty. As she descended the stairs, she heard Samuel's voice, calm and welcoming, coming from the dining room. "Welcome to Evermore Lodge," he said, his smile as radiant as ever. "Where love is eternal." Jenna froze. Around the tables sat the same 5 couples, smiling and laughing as if nothing had happened. Her gaze darted to the windows, where fresh snow was falling, obscuring any view of the forest. When she tried to scream, no sound came out. Her body felt heavy, as though an unseen force rooted her in place. As she turned to run, she caught her reflection in a nearby mirror. Her face stared back at her, pale and wide-eyed, but behind her reflection stood Marcus, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "Love demands sacrifice," he whispered. Jenna's scream finally tore through the silence, but it faded into the distant sound of bells. And then, the world went dark.
Title: The Last Shift. Danielle hated the night shifts at the gas station. Snow blanketed the empty hills of Yamhill, Oregon, and the silence pressed against the poorly insulated walls. At 9:12 p.m., her phone buzzed. The message read, "You're beautiful when you're alone." She frowned, glancing around the station. Outside, the pumps glowed under flickering lights, but the road was empty. Shrugging it off as a prank, she returned to her stocking. Then her phone buzzed again. Another text lit up her screen. "I love the way your hair falls when you're nervous." Her hand froze. She brushed her bangs aside and turned to the window, but the reflection of the station obscured the darkness beyond. She typed quickly, "Danielle." "Who is this?" The response was instant. "Closer than you think." Danielle's stomach twisted. She locked the door, flipped the open sign to closed, and grabbed the baseball bat from under the counter. The security monitor showed nothing but falling snow. Her phone buzzed again. "You're wasting time. I'm already inside." Her breath hitched. She turned slowly, scanning the aisles. The storage room door at the back was slightly ajar. She was certain she'd locked it earlier. Her flashlight beam shook as she approached. Another text came through. "Don't open it." The door slammed shut. Danielle screamed, stumbling back. The lights flickered, then went out completely. Fumbling with her phone, she turned on the flashlight. Her hands trembled as she edged toward the counter. A new message appeared. "It's just us now." A dragging sound came from the storage room, slow and deliberate. Danielle froze, clutching the bat. The sound stopped, replaced by soft tapping on the door. It was rhythmic, deliberate, like someone counting down. Her phone vibrated with another message. "I'm coming." She bolted to the front door, but the lock wouldn't budge. It felt as though the mechanism had frozen solid. She turned, and her heart stopped. The storage room door was wide open, darkness spilling out. A figure emerged, its face hidden by a hood. Her flashlight caught pale, unblinking eyes. The next text sent her into a spiral of fear. Time to go. The man stepped closer. Danielle swung the bat, but he caught it effortlessly, his cold breath brushing her ear as he whispered, "You can't leave." The lights flickered back on. The man was gone. The station was empty. Her phone buzzed one last time. "Look outside." Trembling, she stepped to the window. Written in the frost was one word: run. The air outside felt heavier as she backed away, but she turned to the security monitor for answers. It showed her, but not the real her. On the screen, she stood behind the counter, staring into the camera, her face twisted into a cold, menacing smile. The figure on the monitor raised a hand and waved slowly. Another buzz. This time, the message read, "You'll never leave." A cold draft swept through the station, and she realized the back door was now wide open again. Slowly, she moved to close it, the bat shaking in her hand. But as she approached, she saw footprints in the snow leading away into the night, large, uneven prints, as though something had dragged itself through the drifts. Her phone vibrated again. "Don't follow me." Danielle stared at the text, her breath clouding the air. She turned back toward the counter and stopped. Her reflection in the glass door wasn't hers anymore. The figure she saw was smiling, its head tilted unnaturally, its eyes glowing faintly. Then it stepped forward, tapping on the glass from the inside. Her phone buzzed one final time. "You're already mine."
Title: Shadows in the Snow. The snowstorm had swallowed the world whole. For miles, there was nothing but wind and ice, howling through the abandoned outskirts of Logan, Ohio. Clara Mallory was one of the few who had stayed behind, refusing to leave the ancestral cabin her family had built generations ago. She had always been warned about the woods surrounding Pine Hollow, especially in winter. "The forest changes when the cold comes," her grandmother used to say. "And what walks there isn't human." Clara had dismissed it as old superstition, but now, in the heart of this brutal winter, she wasn't so sure. The first sign came when Clara went to check her traps. The forest was unnaturally silent. No birds, no rustle of branches, just the crunch of snow beneath her boots. She found the trap near the creek, snapped shut but empty, save for a few tufts of fur. Blood trailed away from the trap, leading deeper into the woods. She followed it, her breath visible in the freezing air. The trail ended abruptly, the blood soaking into the snow. But nearby, she saw something that froze her in place. Human footprints, bare feet, deep in the snow, leading back toward her cabin. Clara turned and ran. By the time she reached the cabin, night had fallen. The wind screamed outside, rattling the windows. She locked the door and bolted it, shoving a heavy dresser in front for good measure. As she stoked the fire, something thudded against the wall. Her heart skipped a beat. She grabbed the hunting rifle from above the fireplace and crept to the window. The frost-covered glass made it hard to see, but something was out there, a shadow moving just beyond the tree line. Then came the voice. "Clara, let me in." It was her brother's voice. Her brother, who had died 3 years ago. Clara backed away from the door, her hands shaking. The voice came again, closer this time. "Clara, it's so cold, please." She forced herself to speak. "You're not him." The shadow moved closer, stepping into the faint glow of the firelight spilling from the window. It looked like her brother, his face, his clothes, even the way he tilted his head when he spoke. But the eyes were wrong. They were too black, too empty. "Don't leave me out here," it pleaded. "It hurts." Clara gripped the rifle tighter. She aimed it at the door, her finger hovering over the trigger. The thing outside grew silent, and for a moment, all she could hear was the wind. Then came the scratching. It started softly, like a branch scraping against the wood. But it grew louder, more frantic. Whatever was outside was clawing at the door. The dresser shook as the thing pushed against it, the wood groaning under the strain. "Let me in!" the voice roared, no longer human. It was deeper now, guttural, filled with malice. "You can't hide forever." The window shattered. Clara screamed as the cold rushed in, extinguishing the fire. She turned, the rifle slipping from her hands as a figure climbed through the broken window. It wasn't her brother anymore. Its limbs were too long, its mouth stretched into an unnatural grin. The thing's skin rippled, shifting and bubbling as if it couldn't decide what it wanted to be. She grabbed a knife from the counter and slashed at it, but the blade barely grazed its shifting flesh. It lunged, its hands impossibly cold as they wrapped around her throat. Clara thrashed, kicking and screaming, but its grip was iron. The last thing she saw before the darkness claimed her was its smile, wide, jagged, and filled with teeth. When the search party found the cabin weeks later, they barely recognized it. The walls were covered in claw marks, the furniture smashed to pieces. Clara was gone, but her footprints led out into the woods, barefoot and steady, vanishing into the snow. And in the trees, the shadows watched, waiting for the next to come.